Hey everyone, hello and welcome to S&E's Garage. Today we're here with our 2021 Toyota Camry TRD, which is equipped with Toyota's 2GR FKS 3.5 liter V6 engine. And we're basically going to go over a mechanical aspect review of this vehicle. A lot of the reviews I see are people going over the features, the way the car drives and things like that, but no one's actually getting into the mechanical aspect of the car. So we're going to do that in this video. This engine is actually pretty advanced. It has some pretty neat features that I think are relatively important to know about. So this 3.5 liter V6 makes right around 300 horsepower, 301 to be exact. But it also gets excellent fuel economy. Now there's a few ways that it does that. This engine can run on a simulated Atkinson cycle. Which basically the way the Atkinson cycle works is it leaves your intake valves open a little bit during the compression stroke. It blows some of that compression back into the intake, but the reason that it does that is to reduce pumping loss. You reduce pumping loss and the car will run more efficiently at a sacrifice to horsepower, which is the reason why they don't have it run an Atkinson cycle continuously. It uses variable valve timing, to change the timing of those intake valves to leave them open a little bit and run. It's like a modified Atkinson cycle. Now this vehicle uses a timing chain. It is not belt driven, and it is double overhead camshaft. So you have 4 camshafts, 2 on each head, 4 valves per cylinder. So that's going to be a 24 valve engine, which is, it's basically the norm now. Now this is a front wheel drive vehicle, transverse mounted, so your engine sits sideways. So the front of the engine is actually on the passenger side, and the back of the engine is on the driver's side where it mates to the transmission. Now they do that to make the powertrain sit better in the vehicle without having to put axles coming out of the side of a transmission that is longitudinal, and it makes more sense. Now the only problem with that is your weight distribution. Most of your weight is over the front axles. Which isn't really sports car material, like a tried and true sports car, but in the case of the TRD Camry, it works. They tune the suspension to make it work well. Now with the engine cover removed, it's going to show us a couple things. Number one, this vehicle uses coil on plug ignition system, which means each spark plug has its own coil, which is good because it eliminates your distributor. It eliminates, a single ignition coil. And the vehicle can more precisely control ignition timing, which is important on a vehicle like this because this has a high compression ratio. And in order for you to be able to run regular 87 octane, the car needs to be able to use what's called knock sensors. There's 2 of them, 1 on each bank. And it detects pre-ignition or ping, we call it. And it'll actually retard ignition timing a little bit at the expense of horsepower for, safety of the engine to keep it safer and running better. Now another reason that you can run regular fuel in this car, regular 87 octane, is because of the injection system. This V6 engine actually has 12 fuel injectors. There are 6 port and 6 direct. Port meaning they fire fuel just behind the intake valves, and direct meaning they are directly in the combustion chamber. Now Toyota's D4S system changes back and forth between port direct or a mixture of both depending on the type of driving you're doing in order to maximize a couple of things, fuel economy, horsepower, and engine performance, and like I said, knock control. So it can maximize the way it's running based on the fuel you put in it. Now if you do put 93 octane in this vehicle, it's going to advance ignition timing and you're going to get a little bit more power out of it. Whether you're going to feel that or not is debatable, but I personally, I'm planning on running 93 octane in this vehicle just because of how high the compression ratio is, and it's not going to hurt anything, it's going to help. So right here are those port fuel injectors that I was telling you about. There's going to be 3 here, and then there's another 3 under the intake manifold there. You can see the fuel rails. Now the direct injectors are going to be mounted below the lower intake plenum. You can kind of see the fuel rail down there, and the high pressure fuel pump is actually driven off of one of the camshafts on the rear bank. They do that probably, if I had to guess, for noise, because if it was mounted on one of the, the cylinder head towards the front of the car, not under the intake manifold, it would be a little bit more noisy. High injection or high pressure direct injection fuel pumps are inherently noisy. That's one design flaw, and that's why most manufacturers use some sort of heavy insulation up under that engine cover to try to dampen that noise. Now, another cool thing about this vehicle is that it has basically the exhaust manifold built into the cylinder head. It eliminates the exhaust manifold, so you just have one port that this catalytic converter bolts to. This car uses a three-way catalytic converter, so you're going to have one off of each head and then a third one under the back of the car that is usually not monitored by an O2 sensor. That's like a post-cat. So the two front cats on either cylinder head are going to be the ones that the O2 sensors are going to monitor to make sure that they are performing correctly. Now, the reason that they incorporate the manifold with the cylinder head is for cooling. They can control with coolant passages the temperature of the exhaust gases, and it'll help the engine run cooler with less heat. Less heat is more efficient. Now, as far as air-fuel ratio control, this car uses what's called a mass airflow sensor. It's basically a coil of wire that detects the amount of air being blown past it to let the car know how many, what we call grams per second, are entering it. Now, there's a couple of different systems that vehicles could use. Another one of those is speed density, which basically uses what's called a MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure. Both systems are good. I personally think that mass air is a little bit more precise because the car knows exactly what is entering it, whereas with a MAP sensor, it's just monitoring engine vacuum. Less vacuum means more air is entering it, and it's under a higher load. That's generally how it works. The less vacuum that you have in your engine, the more on the throttle you are. The more vacuum, the less on the throttle you are. So now that we've gone over the engine, let's go over the transmission. This vehicle uses an 8-speed transmission with the model number UA80E. It is an 8-speed transmission, like I mentioned, that is a joint venture between Toyota and a company called Aisin. Now, Aisin makes a lot of parts for Toyota that are, for their original equipment, and previous Camry models have used Aisin transmissions as well. For example, the 6th generation, which is 2007 to 2011 V6, uses the U660E, which is an 6-speed automatic. So Aisin has been around the transmission game for quite a while. Now, Toyota calls this transmission an ECTI, electronically controlled transmission with intelligence. And basically what that means is this transmission will basically learn your driving habits. It'll cater its shifting feel and its shift points based on the way you drive and your throttle inputs, which is pretty cool. Now, with this vehicle, it also has dynamic rev match, so when you downshift with your paddle shifters, it will rev match for you, which is also pretty neat. The car doesn't jerk forward or anything like that. So like I said, this thing is packed with all kinds of technology in the powertrain between the engine and transmission, and they are leaps and bounds ahead of anything else on the market, in my opinion. So now that we've gone over the powertrain, let's move over to the braking side of things. Now, this is a TRD edition, so it's going to have a couple of different features for the brakes that make them a little bit better. Number one, these use 12.9-inch rotors versus the 12-inch rotors that you would find on the XSE, XLE, so on and so forth. And it also uses dual piston front calipers. So instead of one piston, compressing your brake pads, you're going to have two. Now, the XSE, the SE, the LE, they all have single piston front calipers. So the TRD is going to give you a little bit more braking power, and it's going to give you just a firmer pedal feel and inspire a little bit more confidence. Now, as far as I can tell from the research I've done, the rear brakes are the same. They're just, the calipers are painted red. They're not even vented rotors. They're just solid discs, which really isn't a huge deal in the rear because most of your braking force, especially on a front-wheel drive car with all that weight over the front axle, is going to be from the front. Now, another cool feature about the braking system on this vehicle is it has an auto hold feature. So if you turn this system on and you hit your brakes while you're driving, when you come to a stop, you can actually let off of the brake pedal and the car will stay stopped at the light. So I'm in the garage, I'm not going to start the car, but you can see right here this hold button. When I press that, a little light usually comes on. That's not going to let me because the hood's open, that's why it's doing it. But anyhow, you get the point. What it basically does is allows you to take your foot off of the brake and keep the car stopped. Now to start going, you would just tap the accelerator pedal and the car will start going. Now obviously, as all cars are required by the government, this car does have anti-lock brakes, it has stability control, and it has traction control. But it also has electronic brake force distribution, which will also use that ABS pump, which is right back here, to send more braking power to wheels that have more traction in order to keep the car tracking straight, which I think is a pretty cool feature. Most manufacturers are doing that now, but I figured that was worth pointing out. So now that we've touched on the powertrain, we've touched on the brakes and some of the features of the braking system, we're going to look at the whole body of the car now. This vehicle is built on Toyota's TNGA platform, which is shared between a couple of vehicles, a few of those being the Camry, the Avalon, the ES350, and vehicles like that. And the Avalon, it's stretched a little bit, but it's basically the same platform. Now, I believe this is Toyota's first generation Camry with a multi-link rear suspension with upper and lower control arms and springs that are separate from the shocks. If you see, your shock is right there. Most Camrys prior to this, if not all, had a McPherson strut set up all the way around, so you'd have struts in the front and the back. This car uses struts in the front, springs and shocks in the back rather than struts. Now what that's going to do is give the vehicle a little bit more control over what the wheels are doing, and it provides a better, more confident feel driving down the road. Now, one other thing worth mentioning on the TRD is the wheels. They are model specific for the TRD. The Camry and the Avalon TRD are both going to use the same wheels. Now, these wheels are actually wider than what you can get on the XLE, XSE, and SE, but they are actually several pounds lighter. Now, that's going to do a couple of things for you. Number one, that's going to reduce your unsprung mass, which is going to provide better handling, better steering response, things of that nature. But it's also going to give the car a snappier feel because the powertrain has to work that much less to get those wheels moving. So this is basically going to be it for the mechanical aspect of this vehicle. We've touched on the engine, we've touched on the transmission, the braking system, the wheels, and the chassis. So stay tuned. We're going to make some more videos. We're going to do a video driving the car, kind of going over the features while we're driving, and we're going to do a full review on it. So please like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.